All right, everyone, welcome to Served. One of my favorite parts about this show, this medium, is the ability to tell stories about some of the best, most important characters who are just so additive to our sport, but not someone that is going to get like name checked all the time, is not someone who's thirsty to be in front of a camera, but also basically has, in my opinion, largely created the U.S. Open that we see and that we associate with now, where it's the buzziest event on earth. It's better now than it was 20 years ago. Even the details of, like, we didn't have music basically at the U.S. Open like 22 years ago. To see how far it's come in the production side and who's in the crowd and who's singing, who's opening the U.S. Open. It's become a spectacle in the best way possible. And my friend Michael Fiur is kind of in charge of producing this whole event, start to finish, on top of, I had this written down and I had to check with producer Mike off air because I was like, I messed this up. Been involved in 29 Super Bowls, which producer Mike said, what is
he must be like 85 years old.
And he's not 85. He's not 85. College football national champions, 28 consecutive U.S. Opens, right? 5 Super Bowl halftime shows. We became close friends during the years of Davis Cup, right? When it's just shenanigans and then some matches on the weekends, right? And producing those events nonstop. But the man at the helm of creating the spectacle, all of the drama outside of, adding to the tennis, but not that the players aren't responsible for at the U.S. Open. Michael Fiur, I've been wanting this episode for a while. Thanks for joining us. This is gonna be awesome.
Thanks for having me.
So take us back, right? So we're gonna get very deep into the weeds. I can't wait to pick your brain on some of the stories and kind of what you've seen. Talk about your relationship with the U.S. Open, kind of how it's grown over time, and what does like the average first Wednesday of the U.S. Open look like for you?
Oh boy. So really, really fast. I was at Radio City Music Hall, which is where I had done my first Super Bowl halftime show with Michael Jackson. And the USTA called on us to bid on the opening of Arthur Ashe Stadium. So this was 1996, and it was Radio City versus Disney to produce the opening of Arthur Ashe Stadium and produce the first Arthur Ashe Kids Day in Arthur Ashe Stadium. We got that bid, ended up producing that opening night with Whitney Houston in August of 1997, produced the first Arthur Ashe Kids Day with 25,000 kids in Arthur Ashe Stadium with Hanson singing. And the list of performers there goes on and on. And so for the next couple of years, while still at Radio City, I would come in and book the talent and produce the talent for Arthur Ashe Kids Day for the next several years. And then in 2001, left Radio City, and Pierce O'Neill, who was with the USTA at the time, said, I need you to come in and take over producing Arthur Ashe Kids Day for us. I said, no, I have a vacation planned. And he ultimately convinced me to work from vacation and help produce Kids Day that year. That year then also became Arlen Cantarian, who was the chief executive at the time, said, we want Diana Ross to perform at the women's final that was going to be the first nighttime, primetime women's final in 2001. And it was Venus versus Serena. And he said, I want your help with this. Now, what he didn't tell me was there was another production company working on this, somebody else involved, and I ended up being thrown in the middle of craziness. But the group of people that were working on this from Overland Entertainment now 20 something years later, we've all become best of friends and worked on all the entertainment every year. But it started off rocky with this kid coming in and saying, "Hey, I've worked with Diana Ross. I put her in a helicopter at the Super Bowl. I know what I'm doing here." But that next year, 2002, which of course was 9/11, came just 2 days after the men's final in 2001. In 2002 was when we really started to revolutionize things and brought in music and a DJ and a producer in Arthur Ashe Stadium. We brought in a stage manager to assist with players coming on court and interfacing with TV, but working for the USTA. So I hired the stage managers, the DJ, the producer, and that year we brought in a new announcer. We didn't want to immediately dismiss the old announcer, so we brought in a guy named Andy Taylor that we found in Springfield, Missouri, doing a then called Fed Cup. He was a local radio announcer that we would often look for when we were doing Davis Cups or Fed Cups, and we liked his voice, and we said, "Hey, you want to come to the U.S. Open?" And now, 22 years later, he's become the voice of the U.S. Open in Arthur Ashe Stadium. And then it's grown and grown. But I can take a breath there and let you ask.
Yeah. Like it's not often on our tennis show that in the first 12 seconds, not in any sort of name droppy way, it's just the reality of your life. We go from a Super Bowl halftime show with Michael Jackson to opening night of one of the most famous venues in sports now. Arthur Ashe Stadium. Walk me through. Okay, we're opening this new tennis stadium, and now we kind of, I don't know, as a viewer, we feel pretty entitled to. We pan around the stadium, and Taylor Swift is sitting 50 yards away from Elon Musk, who's sitting 50 yards away from Billie Jean King, who's sitting 50 yards away from Usher, who's sitting 50 yards away from Jamie Dimon, who's sitting 50 yards away from, and the list goes on and on and on. How the hell do you book Whitney Houston night one of Arthur Ashe Stadium and level set? Like, this is your first year actually kind of doing this. How the hell do you land Whitney Houston? Because you kind of glossed over that, like that's a normal experience.
It helped at the time to have the Radio City name behind us. So that when we booked Michael Jackson, when we booked Diana Ross to do the Super Bowl halftime show, when we booked Whitney for opening night of the U.S. Open, that was all under the Radio City umbrella. Since then, and since 2001, it's been Michael Fiur Productions, but also with an army of people, an army of relationships. You know, what you see today, I mentioned Overland Entertainment. There are countless people internally at the USTA. Some have come and gone. For some reason, I'm still there. And have been consulting now for this long. But a lot of it is relationship. And, even getting Whitney, the Radio City relationship there was critical, and had worked with her before. So that always helps.
So I want to go through this, and I don't want to miss any parts, because there's so much that I have kind of questions about. You mentioned quickly, like you kind of glossed over at the beginning also, like player walkouts, which has largely become like a staple of the U.S. Open viewer experience. There's no other tennis event, certainly, and maybe not even sporting event, where you kind of get to, you literally get the first interview now, and it's progressed over time. It wasn't in the locker room start when I was playing. It was kind of slightly outside. You don't get to see someone from the locker room get to actually ask about what they're feeling, and they're either going to lie to you or they're not. Like, that's fine. But then the walkthrough to the point of arrival, at Thunderdome, right? At the Coliseum, up their place of work for that night. That didn't exist at all when you started. When these ideas come to you, are you just like, yep, that's what we're doing? Is it a process through TV? Walk us through the process, because it's easy to say player walkouts didn't exist and now they do. But what are the moving parts for making something like that that eventually becomes like an iconic part of the U.S. Open viewing experience?
Well, just to talk about player walk-on this year, where the player hallway was completely revamped, new imagery, new graphics, new technology, and Nicole Cancam, who oversees marketing and entertainment for the Open, her team oversaw this, working with the broadcast group, working with the ESPN. A lot of the vision for putting the interviews in the locker rooms came from Jamie Reynolds, the longtime executive producer for ESPN. And we probably had hours and hours and hours of meetings standing in the hallway going, okay, the camera's going to be here. Let's put tape on the floor where the player's going to be. We had questions raised like, okay, in the women's locker room, what happens if one of the players is using a hairdryer 2 steps away while we're doing the interview? Who's going to ask them to please turn off the blow dryer? The camera in the men's locker room, the camera guy had his back to the bathroom and shower area. And, one night as he was waiting for the player, he sort of turned around a bit, and I sort of held my breath that nobody was going to walk through that shot. And they didn't. And the players really seemed to respond well to it. But literally it was like, okay, the player's going to, stand here. Then player one walks into the hallway, and where do we stand? Where do we put our longtime stage managers, John Coleman and Laura Mack, who've ushered players on and off Ashe for the last 20 years. John Coleman was the first stage/court manager we hired in 2002 and is still the senior keeper of the gate there at the door onto Ashe. Talking to Todd Noonan, who's up in the booth, talking to ESPN. And so what can come across as also very simple is, highly coordinated, highly timed. When do we play the music? When do we cue the PA announce? What is on the courtside LED boards that, of course, was a new addition a few years ago? And what do fans see? And that's all controlled up in the booth by Todd Noonan, who's our primary Ashe Stadium producer and director, who's literally juggling all these pieces at once.
It's just insane. And like, as you're talking about the locker room, so the view that we saw this year in the locker room, it's like right in front of the board of names where, the lucky few get to have their name there forever. And it's the first thing you see when you walk into the locker room is the list of names. So it does have that sense of gravity. And so there's all that kind of majesty in the shot. If that camera turned around, you're 10 feet from a urinal. Like no joke. Like the reality is you talk about the hair dryers. You are towel bin. You are urinal. There's number one, number two, someone's washing a hand, someone's walking by in a towel. Like, it is chaos behind that very shot that's full of gravity and history. And so it's amazing to me because I see both. When I watch on TV, I'm like, oh my God, this is the craziest. And then I'm like, oh, if you take a left there, it doesn't quite look like that Darth Vader hallway that we're walking down into the arena. It's just crazy to see kind of the moving parts. And I'm always fascinated because spatially it has to work, but the stadium was built before you had the ideas for a lot of these places. It's not it's not like a TV set that's built to fit, right? Like, you're having to work around all of these moving parts. And oh, by the way, there are a bunch of tennis players that are trying to do their day job. So for those, 3 minutes or 4 minutes worth of production, you're not allowed to walk through the hallway of Arthur Ashe Stadium. It's like it's like a railroad crossing, but in the middle of the U.S. Open. How often do you all talk about, and it might not matter because, listen, better TV experience equals better ratings, equals more revenue, equals players shut up with your complaints that we're shutting down the hallway for 5 minutes. How much of a conversation is that? Or is your North Star best, product available for the people in the stadium, for the TV, and then let's try to slide it by?
No, look, since Stacey Allister came in as tournament director, more so than the others before her, but there's always been a players first mentality. Now, we also like to have a fans first mentality, and we like to have a broadcast first mentality. But at the end of the day, and more so now, and with Eric Buderak on her team, who's a former player and really is responsible for overseeing the interests of the players on a day in and day out basis. We talked through that, okay, the men's locker room has a back door the players can come in and out of, but where the women's locker room is, it doesn't. And so when we're doing these things and we're shutting down the hallway, we will try and do it for literally the few split seconds. And that if there's a player that's needing to get into the locker room or out of the locker room, we try and adapt for that on the fly, because we don't want to disrupt the tennis. For years, I had the mentality that entertainment was everything and entertainment was paramount. And then over time, tournament directors tried to drum into me that, tennis does come first. And so I've really integrated that into my thinking over the years and allowed room for tennis amongst the entertainment.
I think we're going in opposite directions with this opinion. Like I thought I was, obviously when I'm in it, it's like players first. And then all of a sudden I'm have some space, and I haven't been a player for 12 years, and I'm going, oh, wait a minute, but that's not totally where the revenue comes in that affects prize money. So maybe it's not that much of an inconvenience if we can't walk across the hall for 90 seconds. Like we might be going different directions as far as the way we value the player first experience. And I'm sure I'm going to get crushed for that. Hey there, Chuckers. I used to rely on precision, power, and maybe a little bit of innovation to keep my serve untouchable. Well, turns out those same things aren't just for tennis. They're for racing too. Who knew? Since 2017, Lexus Racing has been doing exactly that. Precision, power, and a whole lot of innovation. Last year, they teamed up with Vassar Sullivan and snagged the 2023 IMSA GTD Pro Class Championship with their Lexus RCF GT3. And let me tell you, that car has got more horsepower than I ever had in my serve. Don't tell my ego. But like any good athlete, one win just isn't enough. All right, a little too personal, but that's fine. They're back, and they're gunning for another title in 2024. You can't miss those Dayglow yellow and black Lexus RCF GT3 race cars on the track. And if you do somehow miss them, you'll definitely hear those V8 engines roaring louder than my victory yell after a big match. So if you want to see what happens when you mix tennis-worthy precision with race car power, follow Lexus Racing every weekend. Head over to lexus.com/motorsports to learn more about Lexus Racing and get all the details on the upcoming races. Walk us through, because it's Arthur Ashe Kids Day was like, I remember the first time I got asked to participate in Arthur Ashe Kids Day. For those listening that don't have a recent relationship with Arthur Ashe Kids Day, talk about what it was, who participated in it. And I'm just telling you from a player perspective, when you got asked to do Arthur Ashe Kids Day, it was like, okay, maybe now you've arrived at the U.S. Open a little bit. Like you have a little bit of cachet when you get asked to participate in Arthur Ashe Kids Day, which had to be the premise of success for what is now Fan Week and the entire full week build out for the U.S. Open. But kind of just give us a quick history of Arthur Ashe Kids Day, some of the craziest moments, performers, and how special it was for you to kind of continue Arthur's legacy through that day of charity for kids?
Sure. The very first Arthur Ashe Kids Day was in '96 in the old Louis Armstrong Stadium, which I did not work on that one, but that was the very first one. And then the first one in Arthur Ashe Stadium, which I did work on, was in '97, and all the others since. And learned so much about Arthur, his legacy, his humanitarianism, his having gone to South Africa and marched with Mandela, starting the NJTL a year after he'd won the US Open. It's remarkable that we're in 2024 and he remains the first and only Black man to win the US Open. On the women's side, you've seen more diversity from Althea Gibson on, who would be the equivalent of Arthur, but we haven't seen that breakthrough on the men's side. But everything that Arthur stood for, and I always say to our group that comes in to volunteer on Arthur Ashe Kids Day, we don't want this to be Memorial Day or Labor Day or a bank holiday that you get the day off and you don't know why. And so we always try to include information for fans on that. And we start off big with Hanson. The next year was Backstreet Boys. The next year was a very young Brittany Spears. The next year was 98.
This is insane. My producer Mike and Techie Sean are like, I can see them. They're like 5 feet from me, and you name that, and they're like, Techie Sean, by the way, he's never heard of any of these bands. Just so we're clear, like he's like 12 years old.
Yeah, Hanson could be like his dad.
Yeah, Hanson is like the guy who did the Muppets. Yeah. Jim Hanson, he was there.
Britney Spears is just
sorry. Don't let us hold you back. Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears.
And then the next year was 98 Degrees, where one of the band members there ended up dating Jessica Simpson, who was also there that year.
Come on, Nick Lachey, right? No.
Newlyweds. The Arthur Ashe Kids Day is responsible for newlyweds.
We are and divorces, but but we would get Sampras, we would get Agassi, we would get you, we would get Federer, we would get Serena, but also we had wheelchair players participating in Arthur Ashe Kids Day, like David Wagner, long before wheelchair tennis was becoming fashionable. We would strive to have diversity in the hosts and the performers. A few years ago, we had Kim Petras in the show. In 2018, after Parkland, we had a group of kids from Parkland that had written this song called Shine and put the kids in the show. So we always tried to tie back to Arthur's message, having responsibility, making it fun. We had the likes of Ellen DeGeneres and Will Ferrell. I don't know if you remember the time Will Ferrell dressed up like James Blake and they played each other. And then as it evolved and it used to be a television special, and as linear TV has changed, we grew it more into an entire ground spectacular. And then the past 2 years and this year, so for 3 years, we've had Dude Perfect, we've made that the centerpiece of the show with players, but have also had musical acts on the grounds, and all continues to tie back to Arthur's legacy, the NJTL, and I could rattle off other names like Rhianna, who was in her little overalls and singing Pond to Replay in 2005.
The original. We just thought it was a hit song. We didn't know it was Fenty Beauty. We didn't know all of this stuff. We didn't know what it would turn into.
Nope. And then probably one of my absolute favorites was 2012. We had Carly Rae Jepsen.
Oh, Call Me
and
Maybe.
We did
Put it in my veins.
Call Me Maybe flash mob on the court where Novak played the Lawnmower Man.
So good.
And the entire cast came out. And then what's crazy, I don't know if you saw it a year ago, but Coco Gauff posted a video.
Yes, it's a video where she's dancing and she's there at Arthur Ashe Kids Day.
as a kid.
Oh,
That's so cool.
It's like these things you just never know.
Do you find that the artists really enjoy doing the kids? Like, I mean, you obviously work with artists in many different other environments. Do you find that they really enjoy
to ask questions? I'm just checking.
This producer is. It's a new thing.
Yeah, he is.
He
is like, it's funny. Like, we believe all the things that you're talking about. Like, we believe in equal rights. Like, producer Mike can get in, and he can have a voice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have to just be in the earbud.
Yeah, but I wish you would have just said, "Shut up, producer Mike."
But what was your question?
It probably wasn't important. Anyways, no.
But I say,
compared to your other events, you throw so many events with so many big stars. Do you feel like the acts and the stars really enjoy Arthur Ashe, the kids event?
Yeah, no,
because of what it represents.
They always have. Sometimes we strive to get them back. The Jonas Brothers is one group that started out on our little festival stage on the grounds in 2005. They weren't even signed to a record label at the time. And after they performed on the grounds, I brought them into Arthur Ashe Stadium and said, hey, someday you guys are going to be on this stage. And 2 years later, they were. And then in 2010, they were back again. And then a few years later, Nick sang at the women's final. And then 2 years ago,
was it 2014?
Yep. And then 2 years ago in 2022, DNCE performed during Fan Week. That was Joe.
Yep.
And then this year, Kevin was at the women's final with his wife and his two girls.
Yeah, I saw that on Instagram. That was cool.
And they're big Jess Pagula fans, and Jess Pagula is a Jonas Brothers fan. So, of course, I immediately text Kevin. I'm like, even though she lost, I said, would you like to come down and see her? And I checked to see, would she be willing to see them? And so, of course, I took them through the back alleys of the stadium and down to see her.
It's just like the marriage of like, it's funny how years and years of ideas, execution, entertainment driven by the North Star in this scenario. It's kind of Arthur's legacy, right? And how do we kind of project that forward while also building this beautiful monster that is the US Open? All these kind of small little touch points in the buy-in from a Whitney Houston on the first night, and then the Jonas Brothers coming, but then all of a sudden you look back, and I would assume that 97 to 2024 goes by, long days, short years, and it's the buzziest event on earth. And it didn't happen overnight. It was like a million good decisions, probably a couple of bad ones thrown in, and here we are.
Yeah, no, I think that the growth coming out of COVID has been exponential. I think people's desire to experience live events, to be out among people again. So the last couple of years have been off the charts. It was certainly building, and we were on that trajectory. And we've shifted over the years. There were a number of years where we did really big opening nights, and we had the likes of Lenny Kravitz and Shania Twain, and then Phil Collins performed in
I need to create some fucking space for Phil Collins, because I'm obsessed with Phil Collins. This is like, we're doing the first half of the show, and the second half is just going to be you telling me about Phil Collins.
Well, and he sang In the Air Tonight as we opened the roof on Arthur Ashe Stadium for the very first time. And the little tidbit was that he had his son on drums, who is
now the drummer for Genesis when he's on tour.
Yep. And then we had Kelly, we had Josh Groban, we had Kelly Clarkson, and then there was this little thing where, when we talk about players first, that by doing an opening ceremony before the matches on opening night, and by wanting to do it in darkness that doesn't really come till about 8 o'clock at night, there were times that the first match wasn't getting on till like almost 9 o'clock at night. And then the second one's getting on at 11 or 12, depending upon who goes first. And so we made a very conscious decision to streamline opening nights, cut back on the ceremony there, and really put the entertainment into other places, including especially Fan Week. And I will say it was very nice this year to stand there, do opening, do a quick video, which I'll talk about in a second, do the anthem, and then go right to tennis. And it felt simple and it was quick and it wasn't quite so complicated and there wasn't so much to clear away. Not that I don't love spectacle, but one of the things we put a lot of time and effort into this year was building a partnership with Alicia Keys. And we worked with her musical Hell's Kitchen. And from the moment I had heard the song Kaleidoscope, when it first came out, which was one of the new songs in the show, it struck me as something that could work for us. And then folks at the USTA, folks at ESPN, everybody ultimately rallied around this idea and then built out. Again, Nicole Cam, who heads up marketing and entertainment, brought in the agency that produces what we call our manifesto video, and they were able to shape a vision with her guidance. And what we ultimately created was this video that was a bucket drummer remix of Kaleidoscope, where we shot bucket drummers around New York City, in front of the Schubert Theater where the Hell's Kitchen is playing, down in the subway, out by the bridges, and then in Arthur Ashe Stadium. And so opening night kicked off with those very bucket drummers in the stadium playing, leading into this video. And then fast forward to Labor Day weekend, and we have Alicia and Serena together sitting in Arthur Ashe Stadium as we come out of playing that video, of course.
Just like people are like, oh, they're sitting there together. No, there's not a lot of accidents. I'll just tell you, like the world
they
of
didn't like text each other in the morning. They're like, you want to sit next to each other?
If you only knew what it took to get them in the same suite at the same time. It's like, oh, we're just finishing up over here. We're just finishing. Oh, should you come here? Should we go there? Should you come here? Should we go there? And it took about an hour to get them in the same place. And I will say that Serena walked into the suite, Alicia came into the room, and I was like, we're at deuce. We may not get another changeover. You have to go out on the balcony now. And they did. And
so sick. The best part about that for me was watching Serena drink a honeydew for the first time.
I heard that had happened.
It was pretty cool.
I love this shit because like I've seen the transformation. Like being there this year, I'm like, okay, so 97, you start opening night. There aren't permanent screens in Ashe yet. Like there's not permanent screens. Like think about there's not permanent screens when they build Arthur Ashe Stadium, and now everything is a screen. Like. We used to like hear a thud of a ball when it hit the back if you hit a big serve because it was like a tarp. Now it's a place to run ads. It is just it is the most intense and beautiful assault on your senses to go watch a live match in Arthur Ashe Stadium. But I just keep saying this, but like to give context of the growth, I'm not lying. There were not permanent screens in Arthur Ashe Stadium in 1997.
Correct. They left. We had them for Arthur Ashe Kids Day, and we had them for opening night, and then they left.
Where would they be?
They were, the scaffolded structures were erected at the north and south ends of the stadium, and then they went away. And then I can't remember the year that they went in permanently.
Did you have to convince them to do the screens and build and put in the scaffolding and everything?
They had to know it was a net benefit.
It was always part of the plan. The USDA had known that to do something of this caliber, would require showing retrospective video footage and all that. And that was definitely a part of it. One of my favorite stories is that also when we first put the screens in, there were players that didn't like the screen.
You toss the ball up and you can see the
felt
screen.
like when you went to serve, even though they're pretty high up, you could see yourself. And so there were two players that we blacked out the screens for, both Americans. See if you can guess who they were. No, he was easy. he was still young.
That's what she said. Oh, sorry, it was just I couldn't resist the Tell
it was Sampras and Agassi.
I was about to say it's Sampras for sure.
But then a year later, Tim Henman winds up in his first match on Arthur Ashe Stadium, and he asks to have the screens taken out. And what he didn't realize was the reason the screens were out. Sorry, not his first match, but his next match having been there last. The prior time he played Sampras, so the screens were not on because of the Sampras rule. Henman thought that would apply to him. We honored his request, but I think that from then on, the screens have always been on. And players, of course, have gotten so used to it by now. Which is why
when I played Tim Henman first round in 2003, which was the worst draw that anyone's ever gotten in the history of draws, because he's the only person I had lost to in the previous 2 months, I said, can you make the screens bigger and more action filled? Can you fill them up with light and sound and all of it? And it worked. we got there. So a couple of other things that just think of all the names, like real quick, like start checking the names that we've covered in the history of this journey with putting on, I call it shows at the US Open, because that's kind of what it is. And that's before we've gotten to, did I read correctly that Justin Bieber's first TV appearance was in 2009 in some US Open capacity? Is that correct?
Yeah, at Kids Day. Over the years, we'd worked very closely with folks at Def Jam, and we would make an annual trip over to their offices, and they would either play cassettes or DVDs of up-and-coming artists. And somewhere I have this DVD of this young skateboarder named Justin Bieber from Canada, singing his first song, and they were like, you have to take a chance on him. And it was the same person who'd brought us Rhianna, and it was the same person who brought us JoJo. And
so they were like, you have to do this. It was like, you kind of had to do it.
And we were like, okay, we'll do this. And so, somewhere there's a picture of me with little Justin Bieber. And actually one of the craziest moments, and somewhere I have this footage, was Justin Bieber at 14 years old interviewing Will Ferrell in the Players Lounge, like while we'd been backstage. And it is gold. It is pure gold. And anyway, Justin had not been back until last year for the first time. And I talked to him on the way in, and he was like, wow. He's like, this all looks so different. He's like, it all seems so much bigger now, actually.
Oh, really?
Where sometimes you come back to something and it seems smaller.
That's the way I felt.
Yeah.
Like it used to be massive, and now actually sitting on courtside by the end of my career was just kind of wasn't what it was. The first time I was out there, I warmed up Carlos Moya for a match before the semis in '98, and I was like, they literally, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Now you can say that's what she said.
Well done.
Except she never said that. Anyways, so Bieber comes back, and then we get to another kind of story like that. So everyone's making obviously the universe, pop culture universe revolves around Taylor Swift now, right? Like it just is. She's, biggest selling pop star, biggest tour that we've ever seen, biggest phenomenon we've ever seen. Puts out beautiful trolling Instagram announcements, which is just fantastic, and shows up at the U.S. Open. this year and seeing that orbit, but people don't know did she sing the national anthem before a night session?
So in 2002, a guy named Merv Heller from Reading, Pennsylvania, was president of the USTA.
I remember Merv Heller.
He calls us up and says, a good friend of mine, he was a lawyer, and he said, a friend of mine, Scott Swift, is a lawyer, and his 12-year-old daughter sings and plays the guitar, and would you let her come and be one of your people that sing the national anthem before the matches at night? And so we were like, sure. So the scene you see in the opening of Miss Americana, the Netflix special, is of Taylor Swift walking out onto court in Arthur Ashe Stadium to sing the national anthem in 2002, with hearing Andy Taylor's voice in the background. And it was her first appearance there. So the next year, Merv Heller's no longer chairman of the board. There's a new chairman. But we get the call again, like, oh, would you have Taylor Swift back? And we're like, well, sure. And so that year she sings America the Beautiful. And then comes the worst decision I ever made, which was a year later, her father asked us, would we put her on Arthur Ashe Kids Day? And we said, she's just taking off. She's really country. We don't think that will play in New York. And
no.
I do not share this publicly very often.
Well, you understand this is going to be public, right? Like the show, like people, like not a lot of people, but people watch it.
Worst decision I ever made.
You said no to Taylor Swift performing, and at that point she's probably performing for, it's free. It's like, it's not as if she's demanding money.
Oh yeah. This was, her hair was kind of curly. She just was starting to get on country radio, and we were like, oh.
Nope.
Yeah.
That's funny. A million good decisions. If you make a million good decisions, you're gonna make 4 bad ones. It's just the way it is. That's I didn't know that story. That's absurd. I want 2 more things. We've covered kind of the obviously the pop culture side and this amazing event that's like this crossover of like this gladiatorial athleticism and showdown and fight crossed with. It's just crazy, but also something that you've really perfected is like, I'll use the Serena last year, but the ceremony, the respect shown to players, maybe coming to an end. But like, I thought what you all did for Serena and deservedly so last year was, it hit the right note. I just feel like there was as much gravity given to, that moment as it should be, as any of the things that you've talked about. You didn't come into tennis as a tennis guy, and, for better or worse, Michael Fiur, you're one of us now. But talk about like the gravity of a Serena retirement and what are the discussions around kind of getting that right? Because that's such like you have to thread a needle so perfectly, and you don't know if she's gonna you don't know if she's gonna react emotionally. Walk us through kind of talking about that. You have to be ready to put on that ceremony anytime she plays. You don't know when she's gonna win or lose. Like that has to be kind of like on call, which is something that people don't maybe really think about.
Yes, that was a lot 2 years ago. We found out about 2 weeks before the Open that it was going to be Serena's last U.S. Open. And we immediately kicked into high gear again with a team led by Stacey Allister and Nicole Kemkem and Chris Woodmeyer and a lot of people, and obviously working closely with Jill Smoller and Serena's team. And it was, when do you do it? How do you do it? And so, and, certain decisions can be made. We know the draw and figure out who's going to play when. So we started to build out a concept, and
you had the concept of a plan.
The concept of a plan.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, we need videos, and who do we want to, narrate a video? And it was like, let's get Oprah. And I'm like, okay, I'll see if I can get Oprah. And we got Oprah. And it's, let's get Gayle King to host this. And it's like, okay, I'll go ask Gayle King, who's a huge fan of the Open and has done a bunch of stuff for over the years. And let's get Queen Latifah involved, who sang on opening night in 2002, which was the first real opening night after the original opening of the stadium. And she sang the national anthem, which was the sort of 9/11 memorial year. And then Queen Latifah came back on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 and sang the national anthem again. And 2 years ago, she also narrated or starred in our U.S. Open campaign. And so she's been a friend of the Open and a friend for a long time. Side note, I first worked with her at Super Bowl 32 when in 1998 she was in our Motown 40th halftime show as a very young Queen Latifah, just crossing over from hip hop. But I digress. So it was, how do we make this even bigger? And somebody threw out the idea of doing a card stunt. I was like, okay, I know card stunt people that we've worked with on Super Bowls, but I don't think they can design this and get these printed within a week. And somehow we did, and we came up with the designs, and we had them put at every seat and all of the aspects that went into this. And so the decision was made was that, win or lose, we would do this tribute to Serena on opening night, because we couldn't tee up something that big every time she was going to play. And then, the sheer adrenaline and energy and everything propelled her to win that opening night match. And then she played again on Wednesday and won again, where we were fully prepared to then do a truncated farewell. And then finally, it was on that Friday night that she did lose, and where, we didn't know what would happen. But again, Stacey Alistair went up to her, asked her if she would speak to the crowd. She did agree to speak to the crowd. And you get these magical moments. I was on court when I think it was Jim Curley went up to Andre Agassi and asked him, would he speak to the crowd after he lost? There's so much of what we do is about reading the crowd, reading the players, reading the moment. You had a match like, like TFO and Fritz, or TFO and Shelton, and you're like, okay, you have two amazing Americans. Do you think that in the instance, with obviously one is going to lose, would they ever both want to speak? And then, we kind of knew, well, in both instances, that was not going to happen, but we've had that a couple of times. And then it's the music, and it's the DJ picking the right songs for the right moment, and again, it's those things like you were talking about that nobody really knows all the things. It just seems like it happens. Like our DJ Triz, who this year, not only do we have the DJ in Arthur Ashe Stadium, but we moved him down into the bowl of the stadium, something we've talked about doing for years. So we did it for all the nighttime matches and the semis and the finals. And he chose to play this very random, rare song called "I Believe in a Thing Called Love" by The Darkness, that happened to be a huge Taylor Swift favorite song that he did not know.
Michael, one of the other things that I want you to talk about is it's not just stars and musicians and tennis players and lighting and framing and, you know, all the other things that go into it. But I think the U.S. Open's really been a leader, starting with, you know, Pride Night, which was a one-time thing, and now it's all the time. HBCU, Latin Nights, AAPI, easy for me to say. Talk about how important it is to kind of use what you've built to give a voice to things that you care about.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, for a long time, the U.S. Open didn't have a platform for diversity inclusion beyond things like Arthur Ashe Kids Day and Arthur's name. And we used Arthur Ashe Kids Day over the years to get that level of diversity, as we talked about earlier, but was really proud in 2019 to have created the first Open Pride event, which was a conversation held during what was the first fan week, where we had the late now Billy Beane, who'd been the first openly gay MLB player, Jason Collins, who'd been the first openly gay NBA player, Billie Jean King, Adam Rippon, and Brian Vahaley, who to this day is the only openly gay male tennis player, past or present, and is now poised to potentially become the next chairman of the board and president of the USTA, and the USTA would now have its first openly gay president in the 100-plus year history of the organization. And then as the diversity, equity, and inclusion department has grown over the last several years, in particular under Lou Scher's leadership, it's grown to put the Open Pride event in the main draw of the Open, to create an HBCU event within the main draw of the Open, and as you mentioned, also Latin and also AAPI. And it's included having coin tossers on court, and not just Ashe, but Armstrong and Grandstand, who are representing these different backgrounds. Pride Night became a celebration with Pix Mob light up bracelets like you'd see at a concert, and having an openly gay DJ DJing in the bowl in Arthur Ashe Stadium. And to see this now become part of the fabric of the Open Arthur Ashe Stadium, the exterior gets lit up in rainbow pride colors, the rainbow flag, the pride flag flies at the tennis center. So for me personally, to have seen this growth and this change and to see the organization get behind it also makes me very proud to be associated with an organization that has these beliefs and shares my beliefs.
I think the gift of my lifetime is traveling at such a young age in the tennis world, right? Where you are traveling to different cultures, you're around a million different people, someone being gay or black or anything else was just so normal, you know, in the world of tennis. And I'm glad it's represented by the U.S. Open and all of these different ways now, because it was honestly what I saw. I'm a kid from Nebraska. My dad was a farmer in Wisconsin, and then I was from Texas. And then all of a sudden my first trips to Colombia, and then I'm around a bunch of players, right? And it's just, you're exposed to everything. Nothing is out of it. I'm just glad that, you know, at the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center in Arthur Ashe Stadium, we now just talk about stuff, right? We now just have these discussions that have always felt very normal for me, but as time goes on, I realize they're not normal for everyone. And what better place in the shadow of celebration of sport to really celebrate these things. Kudos to you, Michael Fiur. In the context of that, we're also going to let our producer ask another question.
I always get asked this from people, but like, how would you define what a producer does? Because like just the way you just described it was literally 55 different skill sets.
Yeah.
So how would you describe what a producer does?
Great question.
Well, I mean, a podcast producer is somebody who sits around, doesn't do very much.
Exactly.
But
I just thought this couldn't have gone any better. Oh, this is great.
When you're a live event or TV special producer, I mean, I've always called myself the glue that holds everything together. I'm very equally right-brained and left-brained. I will sit with a budget and continue to play with the Excel spreadsheet till the last penny ties out. And I've always taken great pride in managing budgets and be able to handle the financial side and then also the creative side. But I also, am a huge believer in teams. When we produced, for instance, some of the big Super Bowl halftime shows like the Michael Jackson show or the Diana Ross show, where when you looked at the whole show, you could look around the room and say, this idea came from that person and this idea came from that person. The person who had the idea for Michael Jackson to pop up on each of the two video boards at the Rose Bowl, was one person. And I always think it's really a collective. It's cliche to say that there's no I in team, but and I will often say that I'm the one who gets to, not necessarily always be out front, but certainly get a lot of the credit for the sexy stuff. And it's every person in every phase of the operation, from court attendants to ball crew to the cleaning staff to the people in marketing to the people in the box office to the player operations side and on and on and on, that my favorite thing to do is collaborate as a producer and be able to help pull everybody in the same direction. To have an idea and be like a dog with a bone with that idea and do whatever it takes to, get it over the line. I'm probably mixing analogies here, or mixing metaphors, but also to know when to let go and to say, okay, this isn't going to work. Let's shift gears. I've mentioned Billie Jean a couple of times, and the two lines I use from her all the time are that champions adapt. And so when I'm ready to be my most stubborn, Taurus, inflexible self, I try to tell myself that. And then I once said to Billie, watching a match, I said, so it's 1 point at a time. And she's like, no, it's one ball at a time. And breaking it down even further there.
Listen, this is, I know our listeners are going to lose it over this, because the best part of our show, like when I'm doing US Open recaps or preview shows, the content of a show is written for you at that point, and you're just reacting to what is. And it's frankly, you're basically just banking on a lifetime of memories, observations. And I love the behind the scenes stories of how a tennis fan's experience happen. I don't know that anyone has had a larger finger on the button of that kind of viewer experience than you have, frankly, at the U.S. Open over time. You've been a friend of mine from our Davis Cup days and our U.S. Open days, someone I know that if I text with a panic question, problem, some sort of advice that I'm seeking about something, I know that I'm going to get a response very, very quickly and with some thought behind it. I appreciate you. I know our fans are going to eat this up. I know not the easiest thing for you to do 5 days after you finish the U.S. Open, and a couple of days before you have to write, have a report due for the NFL. But I thank you for coming on with us, sharing your experiences. And like I said before, if you weren't a tennis person when you started this gig with us in 1997, I'll knight you. You are unequivocally a tennis person now and forever. Michael Fiur, you're the best. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you.